I think every nurse has their way of dealing with that aspect of the unpredictability of going to work, but you can never prepare yourself for the day, really. And again, it's that constant anxiety.
I think that's probably one of the hardest realizations about nursing is that if you make a mistake, you're making a mistake with someone's life.
You're not dealing with a few things that went wrong, you're dealing with people's lives. And so when there's a few different things going on at one time and you feel like you don't have enough hands, like your anxiety and the intensity and the pressure rises up.
The expectation is when the person comes into the hospital with an illness that they're going to hopefully get better and go home. And often that doesn't happen. The body goes to the morgue to be dealt with in the usual way, and we go into the next room and keep on working because those people are still alive and they're still with us and they still need care. And it's hard.
Unfortunately, we see child abuse, which is a devastating trauma for me as a nurse. It's a difficult thing. Those are, for me, the hard ones because you see it happen over and over and nothing really changes.
One of the most probably traumatic situations I've ever seen, one that stuck with me probably the hardest was a little boy that was brought in, and this boy was beaten like you can't even imagine. You could have run over him with a vehicle and he wouldn't have been in the shape he was. I had a sheet that I had to fill out, and you have to write down all the abrasions and bruises and swellings and anything. And by the time I was done, that little piece of paper man was covered. He was black and blue. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. And then you go home to your own kids and you just can't believe that people do that to their kids. Like, I remember his hair falling out, like there was chunks of hair falling out. He had bite marks all over, his head was swelling. And I remember looking up and the RCMP officer just had tears rolling down his face. But it's hard to keep it together.
And I remember this young girl came in and she was just on the cusp of whether she should be a child or an adult. And she was pregnant and the baby was coming and it was way too soon. And she gave birth to that baby, and together we watched that baby take its last few breaths. And I think that's probably one of the scariest and saddest days of my life. Made me really glad I didn't have kids, but it made me glad that I could be there for that child because both her and the child that she gave birth to didn't have anybody else. And I was lucky enough and honored enough to be there. And it made a mark on me for sure.
He was a little cardiac baby who had had his cardiac repair, had come back to us from Edmonton. And the baby was doing well on the ward, and then, like I say, had a cardiac arrest, so kind of came to us. So he had no family there, and we tried to resuscitate him, and we were unsuccessful. He died. And then there was another cardiac event on the ward, so we had to take this poor little baby in his crib and move the crib to another room to set up for the next patient and just leave that baby alone.
Some things you can't let go. There have been some situations that have been really horrible. We did have a patient on one ward that I was working on that threatened to kill people. And we as nurses certainly didn't know how to deal with it. We were looking at each other and trying to support each other, but it was really hard to go into work and then think, there are 6 groups of patients I could have to look after that day, and I really don't want to look after that woman whose brother was the one who said that he was going to do those things. And I never did end up caring for that woman, and I felt a very strong sense of relief. Then I felt a very strong sense of guilt that I was so relieved that I didn't have to look after that person.
When people say PTSD, my thought usually goes to war or things like that. Not realizing that it affects nurses. The more we talk about it, the more I realize in our profession that's a possibility that it does affect us.
It's hard. Like it takes a specific kind of person to be a nurse that can handle the situations that go on. So it's harder than people think it is. You come out of nursing school believing that you're just going to be there and you're going to help people and life's going to be wonderful. Nobody tells you about all the stuff that you're going to have to deal with and take home with you, and you know, the potential counseling you're going to need in your life to do this job.
I don't think you deal with it that day, and I don't think you deal with it while it's happening. I think they're all things that you sort of reflect on in the quiet hours and the hours that you're maybe by yourself.
When you start talking about it again, you can, I mean, there's certain kids that I can tell you exactly what bed in the old unit they were in and when they died and what they died from. So it's still always a piece of you that doesn't ever really go away.
I don't know that we balance so much as we just deal with it and move on. I don't know that there's ever a balance really, and I've probably seen more death than I would ever have anticipated. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. There's pictures in my mind of people who have died that I wish I could bury somewhere. Because obviously they're buried, but the memory's not buried in me. And I think that's probably the hardest part, is you have pictures in your head for years and days and months and weeks. You want them to go away and you don't want to remember them, but you don't really know where to put them and you don't really know how to turn them off.
I think the hardest part for nurses is that we don't reach out for help, right? Because we're so busy saving everybody else that we don't have time to save ourselves. And I think the minute you stop and say, wow, I'm not dealing with this really well, now you're admitting that there's an issue.
And part of nursing is caring, but I think they summed up in the study when they called us wounded healers. That is something that really I never thought about. Because yeah, we are there as healers, but a lot of us are wounded and we don't recognize that we're wounded.
Manitoba Nurses Union has started the conversation, and we all know that people start talking about it and then change happens. We can't change anything until there's an acknowledgement that there's a problem, and people are willing to say, it's happened to me, and if it happened to me, it can happen to somebody else.
I just really think that if I ever made that call and I just said, I've had all I can take, or this is a situation that happened and I was really doing the best I could and now I need the support, I really feel confident that they would be there for me to help me through it.
I do believe that the Manitoba Nurses Union doing the kind of research that they're doing for PTSD is tantamount and really, really important, because without it, I'm not sure that there would be any research done, and I think that it's super important for the health and the well-being of the nurses.
It would be nice if we can make it better for the nurses that are going to be looking after me in my time when I need them.